Welcome to the Creating High Performance Athletes podcast. I'm your host, Olympian Jonathan Edwards. Let's get started. Hey everybody, hey, it's Jonathan, and welcome to another week, another podcast, another video. It's great. Hello to all my athletes, to all my parents, to all my coaches. It's been a great last couple of weeks. People writing in with some good questions. If you got a question for me, Coach Edwards at athletespecific.com. I just want to, for all my athletes watching too, all my athlete breakthrough blueprint athletes, hello, good on you for checking in and getting some more content. Love it. So, this week we had an interesting discussion. So, had one of my athletes deal with a pretty significant, let's just say a bad result, right? So I like to say there's no good or bad. There's just learning, right? So there's no winning and losing. There's just learning. The problem is that when you're an athlete and you're young and you're going through that stuff, like when you lose, it sucks, right? You lose in a big way. So, so one of the stories that, I wrote about in my book, In an Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life, was about when I got left off my first ever Olympic team. I had gotten involved with, for those of you guys that know, got involved with the sport of luge, basically in 1988. And then 4 years later, I had a chance to make the Olympic team, which is pretty rare. But my partner and I, we put in a lot of work, and we got really good really quickly. And we were the fastest American team at the time. And then we got left off a team that we probably should have been on. Everybody thought we were going to be on. Everybody was telling us like, hey, no matter, even if you lose Olympic trials, then they're still going to pick you, because the way it was is like if you won Olympic trials, you were automatically on the team, and then if the second team that was going to be a coach's discretionary pick. Long story short, we weren't that pick. No, but the reason why I share that story was because our mental setup going into that was that, hey, listen, even if we had a bad race, and the track that we raced on in Lake Placid was actually it wasn't at all similar to the track that the Olympics were going to be on. That was one thing, but also in terms of like the European tracks, it wasn't very good, or wasn't as good as what we were used to. So we were, for lack of a better term, we were like a giant slalom team, and the old Lake Placid track was like a slalom track, and we lost a very close race. It was like 800ths of a second, three teams within 800ths of a second. It was tiny. Anyway, long story short, we didn't go, and we were devastated, right? We were just gutted. And one of the things that I wasn't prepared for mentally, and nobody really, nobody prepared us for it. Not that you can really prepare an athlete too much like this, but one of the things I think at the time was our focus as a team was very short-sighted. It was just this Olympics. The goal was like, okay, we want to make this Olympic team. It wasn't that we want to have a long, successful career as a team. And there's a big shift there, right? So one is like, oh, I'm just so focused on this next team. And I worked with a cheerleading athlete at one point who was just like, had to make the team. And the parents were pulling out all the stops so that, she would make this team. And it was hardcore, but it wasn't like, the focus wasn't like she was going to have a long, successful time as a cheerleader, right? Like she wasn't, and so what happened was when she didn't make the cheerleading squad, she was totally devastated, right? And so a lot of what sets up an athlete for their mental state after a result has a lot to do with their state going into the event, right? So if they're just all in and like, oh my God, I have to make this team, right? It has to happen this year. Then the pressure goes up, right? Like the pressure goes like way, way up. And so if it doesn't work out, then bad things can happen. And I've seen this happen to athletes just kind of over the years. I've seen athletes who completely dropped out of sports based on like one bad result when they never really had any bad results up until that point. I've seen athletes who breeze right through things, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with the mental state that the athlete's in going into their career, their season, their result. And now that being said, every athlete comes to the end of a career, right? But that's a different mental framework than for a lot of the parents who I work with and the families I work with. Like their athletes are typically on the, I want to say on the left side of the bell curve as opposed to the right side of the bell curve, if you know what I mean, right? So with that in mind, I wanted to help kind of people today. I just want to share just some ideas. I'm working on another book, and I talk about this in my book, In an Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life, about like, when an athlete has a bad result, it's kind of like someone died, right? The athlete has to go through the same steps psychologically that when they have a bad event, a bad race result, a bad, tryout, like you name it, they got to go through the same stuff as they would if something bad happens. Somebody died, their cat dies, their grandpa dies, like whatever. And so to start, the approach the athlete has and the family has to a sport is really important. Because like I said, if your attitude is like, hey, we're in this for the long haul, like we're going to do this, right? And if you have one bad result, like that's okay, like because we're going to keep going. What tends to happen is that people around you pile on, right? They're like, oh, if you go to like the family picnic and you've just come, you didn't make the high school basketball team, like people are going like, oh my God, your dream of playing college is done and whatever. One of the things that goes with that is that your goals are very unique to you, and I say as a family too. Like, so nobody really knows, nobody cares, nobody really should care, nobody should comment on your goals as a family. Like, so if your athlete wants to go to the Olympics, that's your deal, right? And so part of what goes along with that is kind of keeping those quiet, right? Keeping those dreams, those plans quiet, because if you just throw them out there and you declare like, hey, I'm going to make the Olympic team, well, then anytime you have a misstep, according to other people, they're going to pile on you. And that's not cool. So that can lead up to like, if we have a bad event and then you're going to that family dinner, drunk Uncle Harry is going to be on you about like, and asking like, why didn't you do very well? Right. And, are you going to go back to school, or are you going to stop, or, any of those things. Right? Those aren't cool stories to have. And so you want to avoid it, but that can add to the pressure going into the event. But if your family just decides like, hey, listen, we're in this, we're going to give it, whatever it takes, we're going to give it years or months or whatever it is for you, then that is going to help your athlete go through this result. Because if you've got a very short leash on things, then the next bad event, the next bad race, the next bad, practice, tryout, whatever, has all that much more pressure on it. And so I tell my athletes, I go, listen, there's no big games. Like you got to come to every little game like you would a big game, because you're developing those habits, those techniques, those attitudes that you need to succeed on those big stages as you would on those little stages. Because if you don't have it on the little stages, you don't all of a sudden miraculously get it on the big stage, right? Now, granted, there's certain things you can't always replicate, but you can go into those small events with the same attitude, right? I like to say like there's no wasted events, like there's no wasted practices, there's no throwaways, right? Because just what you're telling your brain is not good. So how your athlete goes into the event is gonna help or hurt how they come out of the event. But one of the things that everybody needs to understand is that the 5 stages of grief that your athlete goes through after they lose, right? It's the same as if Fluffy dies, right? So here's the deal. So number 1 is denial. Right, is like they can't believe it happened to them, right? Not again, sort of thing, right? For those of you guys old enough to know, there's Dan Jansen, who was an American speed skater, and Dan Jansen was like the best in the world in the World Cups, right? The World Cups are the events that happen every single year. They travel to all these different cities and where there's skating ovals, and Dan was like the best in the world. But when it came to the Olympics, something always happened, and he lost or fell or whatever. Like one year his sister died of cancer. And actually the day that Dan Jansen finally got his gold medal, like Dan should have had like 8 gold medals in his career. But the day he finally got his gold medal was the same day that Mark Grimet and I had the highest finish ever for the United States in the sport of luge in history at the time, right? So we were the top story. Like, we competed in the morning. We were the top story that day. And then like a couple hours later, Dan Jansen finally won his gold medal, took all my press, right? My life would be completely different if Dan Jansen hadn't stolen all my press and Mark's press and all that stuff. So I'm teasing, but you get the point. But so Dan, he rebounded like every single year. Like, he had a rebound. But after each one of those events that he had a bad result, he went through denial. Like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. There's one event of him, I think it was in Calgary. I think it was just after his sister died. He tripped, like, it's flat ice and you trip, and the look on his face, if you Google it, you'll see this look on his face like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. So denial sets in like right after the event happens. Like, I can't believe we lost. I can't believe I lost. I can't believe I made that stupid play, whatever. Denial just like right away. 1A, like, so if that's 1A, denial's 1A, 1B then morphs into like, don't talk to me, right? Like, you just want to curl up into a ball and isolate yourself, right? So isolation is 1B. Right. And I went through that, and where you're just like, I don't want to talk to anybody right now. But what ends up happening is that as a parent, you don't want your kid to feel bad. Right. And that never really goes away. And so what parents tend to do is kind of rush it, right? They kind of rush you through it. And in a good meaning way, like, you don't want to see somebody suffer. It's like, okay, let's go for pizza. Let's go for dinner. Let's do something to distract you. And that is a valid technique. Like, that is something that is in the short term, if you have an event like this and you can distract somebody, then that can help for a little while. I remember once, this is kind of a funny story, but I remember when I was in high school, I broke up with a girlfriend, or she broke up with me, and I was devastated. Like, I didn't see it coming, and so I like kind of headed home, but her friend, this is great, her friends like felt bad for me, so they wanted to take me out. Like, they wanted to take me out to a bar, or take me out to like wherever we went, like the movies or what. And I was like not into it. And I went, like, they dragged me out, but I was like, I don't need this, and that's important to understand. Like, your athlete, when they've had a bad result, like, they need that time, right? They need to process it. And here's the thing, is that everybody processes things differently. Right. So, I had a teammate who, when they had a bad event on Saturday, you couldn't really talk to them till like Wednesday or Thursday of the next week. It was just like, don't talk to him. Like, just don't bother. And so that he was in denial, and he was in isolation for like 4 days. But through that time, then he moved into the second phase. Right. And this is what a lot of athletes do, is they get into anger, right? That they're angry. They're angry at usually a lot of stuff outside of themselves. They're angry at themselves. They beat themselves up. Right? They're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I can't believe I did that. Like, you're an idiot. This is horrible. Oh, but then it's like the ref was an idiot. The coach was an idiot. The weather was an idiot. Like, the field, like their shoelaces. Like, it's just, again, it's that anger phase is just kind of shoots out of them, right? And that's where, again, an athlete has to process those things, right? And they have to do that on their own. But if we back it up and go like how they went into the event and the pressure that they piled on themselves going into the event is usually what makes these stages after the event, after the result, worse or better, right? So if anger can be better, but whatever. The third phase is bargaining, right? Is like, oh, if only this had happened, then I would do, or if I could get a better result, I would sell my sister. I would, if I could just be on that team, I would do whatever. And I remember going through those phases where you're just kind of like, your mind is going a million miles an hour, and you're just going like, is there anything I can do right now to turn this backwards? Like, is there anything we can do to change this result? Right. But again, it's another phase. And you can, what's cool is like for a lot of parents who hear my voice and, read my blog posts and read my book and things like that, they start seeing this in their athlete, and they're like, I get it. Because even in the same house, you may have two athletes who go through this. They'll go through it maybe at different paces. Like, some will go through it quickly, some will go through it slowly. But either way, they're going to go through it, right? So the fourth phase that people fear, okay, And it's because we throw this word around like way too much right now in our society is depression, right? It's like, oh my God, I don't want my athlete to be depressed. Because then you think like, oh, they're going to be like on like drugs, living in a van down by the river, right? Like your mind just disasterizes these things, and that your athlete is going to, oh my God, get in depression, and they're never going to get out of it. Depression is like you've been diagnosed with cancer, right? It's not. No, it's a mental state. It's something that can be worked through. It's harder for some than others, but it's not something that they're stuck with. It's funny if you go online and you talk about like grief, right? And so that's basically what we're talking about here is your athlete is in grief. The psychologists will talk about grief like, oh my God, yeah, an athlete can get into stage 4, they get into depression, and then they might get stuck there. And then you're like, and then they might need medication. And then it's like, dude, no, it's all good. Like they're bummed out. No shit. They're bummed out. They were trying really hard for something and it didn't come through. They're gonna be a little depressed. Now, here's the thing, and they might be a lot depressed, but it's a phase, right? It's something where they're gonna compensate. Like in the world of strength and conditioning, when we talk about lifting weights, right? We talk about a thing called super compensation, right? So what does that mean? Well, okay. So today, let's say you can do 10 push-ups, right? And you're gonna go in the weight room, and you're going to work really hard, and you're going to do 3 sets of 10 push-ups. You might even put some weight on your back, something. But after that, you're going to be sore. You're going to be like, you're not going to want to move, right? If you came in tomorrow, your body would be in a depressed state because it's still trying to repair. It's still trying to recover. And when I look at this mentally with athletes, they're just trying to repair and recover. They're just trying to process like, what the hell happened? Like, what did I do? What did I need to have done? Like, what could I have done better to have a better result, right? But they got to go through the phase. So the depression phase is not something that you need to avoid. It's actually something that needs to be worked through and just processed, right? Because then the best phase for any athlete. So what happens a lot of times is that people don't let, like coaches, parents don't let athletes go through these phases properly. They want to intervene too quickly. They want to intervene because they're worried like, oh, yeah, Jimmy's going to jump off the bridge, right? Or Sally's going to develop an alcohol problem. And this is one of the things that happens here is that, so I have an athlete right now in my Athlete Breakthrough Blueprint program that went through some really bad stuff recently, right? And now I know from working with this athlete over a long time that they have a tendency to want to soothe themselves with things outside themselves, right? So I remember when my kids were born, and my son, he used like a soother, right? Some people call him like a sucky, like he used one of those, and he used to use them, and he would fall asleep, right? And people were like, "Oh, that's bad for his teeth," or "Oh, you should take that away. Like he's not going to be able to soothe himself." Like, so if your kid's like crying a ton, people are like, no, they gotta, you shouldn't give them anything. They need to figure out how to self-soothe. But when they're like 4 months old, they don't really have that yet. They don't, but there's big schools of thought on this, and there's people that go like, no, you should just let your baby cry it out until they get too tired, they fall asleep. Well, listen, I think as adults and as athletes turn into kind of adults, they're gonna look for things to distract, to soothe, but really we don't want them to develop this idea that, oh, they've got to go out and get pissed drunk for the week, right? Like if they have a bad result, now they resort to drugs or medication or things like that. I had an athlete that I worked with who was on an Olympic track, and they had an injury. This blew me away. So they had an injury, and the doctor had prescribed basically extra Percocet. I'd been given Percocet once for wisdom teeth, and I had that prescription for like 8 years, the same bottle for like 8 years. But this athlete, the doctor had actually given her extra Percocets for this injury she had, so that, and this is what the doctor told her. He said, like, listen, if you have a bad day, bad result, whatever, he goes, just take one of those and go to sleep. And I was floored. Because what had happened, of course, is that this athlete had started to rely on. Now, luckily, it was for this athlete. She was smart enough not to stick with the Percocets, but she would like look for other stuff. And for her, it was food, And so she developed these these outside, she started relying on outside influences to soothe. And as opposed to just realizing like the processes, the things that she was going through, the stages she had to go through mentally, once we like walked her down a path of understanding, like, okay, listen, yeah, you had that bad result once, and then you got injured, and here's what you needed to have done. First and foremost, you need to have embraced the fact that you were in full-on denial, right? After that happened, right? Not a good day, right? And then that's 1A. And then 1B is like, yeah, when you wanted to like check it, when you didn't want to talk to your mom or your dad, and you told your boyfriend to go to hell and get out of the, like, that's totally acceptable. That's part of this phase, right? And then, oh yeah, when you got really angry, at your, and for her, it was her coach. She full on got angry at her coach, and blamed equipment and all this stuff, like whatever. Like, so I explained to her, like, these are all the phases that you need to have gone through, and unfortunately, for her, and partly at the mistake of that doctor, that good, well-intended doctor, but not good. She basically sabotaged that process, right? And so, as parents, I want you to understand, like, you're at, like, it sucks, yeah. When your son or daughter goes through something bad, they're gonna have their process, and you got to go through it, because the most important thing that comes out of all this, right, is that when you process it all really, really well, right? And you come to the last stage, right? Which is acceptance, right? You come to acceptance. So, in the world of meditation and mindfulness, right? There's this concept that, like, for every trauma that you've gone through, that it's kind of like opening a tab on your computer, right? So, what ends up happening over time is you have multiple tabs going, right? You have multiple tabs open. And just think of all the times that your athlete may have had a bad result, right? And then, you push them through it, and you wanted to get them feeling better again. So it's like, okay, come on, let's go do something, whatever. Well, that's like an open tab on your computer screen. Over time, and we've all had this experience, you got all these tabs open, and you try to do something, and then your cursor, like, you've typed like a ton, and then your cursor hasn't moved, right? And then you wait and wait and wait, and all of a sudden your cursor's like blah, 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 and you realize you had like 6 typos, and then autocorrect kicks in, and you're like, what? I didn't say, I was trying. Well, anyway, I'll save that. I won't get rude. But so the thing to understand is that the acceptance phase at the very end is what's so cool, is because that's where an athlete starts to reprocess and double down. Like, they basically understand that, okay, I was trying really hard to reach this goal. And for Mark and I, it was the Olympics, right? We tried really, like, a lot of people told us, like, wow, in 4 years, you guys have a chance to make an Olympic team. That's like really rare. And that's cool. And that was true, but we still wanted it, right? It wasn't like we weren't trying, we still wanted it, and it didn't hurt any less. Afterwards, when we went through that kind of the acceptance phase, there was a little bit of like, well, yeah, we did just start like 4 years ago, and here we are, that's pretty cool. Right. But what we accepted was the loss, and we decided, this is the most critical piece. And I would add this to the 5 stages of, grief. I would add stage 6 is like double down, right? Now you have the mental tools to go back in and say, all right, listen, here's the deal. For Mark and I, it was this idea that, we doubled down. We said, like, okay, next Olympics, we're going to be so damn good, they have to pick us. Right. And then we decided, like, well, how are we going to do that? Well, one was we were going to have the best start in the world, and at the Olympics 2 years later, we went to the Olympics, and we had the fastest start on the second run. We were the second fastest start on the first run, I think. But by doubling down, saying, like, all right, we were now recommitted. And so that's the good stuff that comes out of a bad result. And in today's day and age, like, we do try to, I think, distract a little bit too soon, because we're not preparing our athletes to understand, like, okay, listen, you're gonna have a bad result at some point. Like, we're not gonna plan for it, but it's gonna happen, right? It's just a matter of, and the worst thing that can happen for an athlete is that they have nothing but success for a really long time, and then all of a sudden they have a bad result, right? So I won't name names, but there was an athlete that I knew, came up through the ranks, was one of the best in the world, like really never had anything bad happen. And then all of a sudden their first Olympic team comes around and they didn't make it. And that was like, what do you mean I didn't make it, right? This is why we want to encourage our athletes to actually have, bad results. When you look at long-term development of athletes in any sport, they'll tell you that at certain ages and certain stages of development, well, an athlete should be winning a bit. They should be competing in a good spot, where the results are not too hard, not too easy. And then you're going to have days when they lose, right? And so the important thing is like you learn from those bad results. You learn from the losing. And everybody would agree that, you tend to learn more from losing than you do from winning, right? The athletes that always win, it's kind of hard to step back and go, hey, wow, I didn't really, I don't know what I need to learn from here. I was the fastest person, or I scored the most, or I did whatever. Like you don't get as much. But when you lose, now you have a benchmark because you lost to somebody. And that's where you go like, okay, like, all right, I lost to that girl and she's, what are the differences? Oh, she's 2 years older, or she's 2 years younger, or she's lighter, she's heavier, she's stronger, she's quicker, she's like whatever. You're just coming up with those. You're coming up with those now, those learning points that the athlete can now move forward with, right? But you don't get there if you don't have the bad result, right? So to kind of recap all this for today, I want to leave everybody with the fact that, all right, understand this and talk to your athlete. If you're a parent watching this, if you're the athlete, listen, understand that you're going to have a bad result, right? If you're not having a bad result, you're not working hard enough, right? That's one way to look at it. So I work with a lot of goalies. And one of the numbers that every goalie has is they have their save percentage. So whether the team wins or loses today, they know that they saw a certain number of shots and then they saved a certain number of those shots. Well, that to me is a better grade. So what happens is for a lot of goalies, they'll have a save percentage that they see on game day, right? So for like hockey goalies, it can be upwards of like 98%, right? They'll save 98% of the shots they see. For a soccer goalie, they may not give up a goal for games on end. For a lacrosse goalie, they may stop just 50% of the shots they see on a game. Well, what that means is when they go to practice or they go do a scrimmage, they should be seeing more difficult shots. They should be seeing more difficult shots so that they can't. So that they know they're getting a higher percentage of shots. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. But you know what I mean? If they're stopping 50% of the shots on game day, they should be stopping 40% of the shots or 30% of the shots in practice. It means they're getting hard enough shots. It's like if your kid comes home with a quiz and they get 100 on the quiz, hey, that's great. But it's like, well, was the quiz hard enough? Right? That's one way to look at it, right? You can say like, oh, well, everybody else got 100. Well, it probably wasn't good enough for anybody, right? It needed to be harder. That's why, like when you go to college, you might have a professor that gives you an exam, and what they do is they deliberately give questions that are so hard that a certain percentage of the class, the entire class gets those questions wrong, and then there's questions that entire class gets those questions right. And so what the professor does is they cut them off, like they don't count those anymore. If everybody got a question right, then it wasn't hard enough, right? So. With your athlete, you got to help them understand that, hey, you're going to have a bad result. And when that happens, here's what's going to happen. You're going to be in denial. That's 1A. You're going to want to isolate yourself. You're not going to want to talk to anybody. And that's totally cool, right? That's 1B, right? Then you're probably going to get a little angry, okay? Just don't break anything, right? And then don't do drugs, don't do alcohol, don't look to those things outside of you. Just know, hey, the anger's coming, right? Then you're going to bargain a bit, right? You're going to wish something could have changed that would have made it better. And then you're going to get kind of bummed out. Now, the goal with that is that you're going to get bummed out, and some people get bummed out for a long time. Some people are like, I get it, I'm bummed out, but let's go, right? I had one soccer athlete, I worked with one of the top athletes in the country, and his dad was a bit of a big, gruff, metalworking guy, but he's like, listen, you can be in a bad mood for 48 hours. That's it. I'm giving you 48 hours and then you got to bring it back. Like he had a rule on it. So what was kind of cool about that was that this athlete, when he was young, when he was like in his early teens, he was like, I got 48 hours. And what was cool about then was that he was kind of looking forward to it. He's like, okay, I got 48 hours. I can be bummed out, but then like about a year and a half into it, he didn't care anymore. It was kind of cool. He's like, yeah, I got 48 hours, but after 24, I was good. And then it got to the point where he got into his later teens. He was like, you don't need to get depressed over this stuff. But he knew that, and he was able to deal with that because he had that framework, and that's what I want you to give your athlete, right? Because once they know that, hey, they're going to be a little bummed out, and I don't even like to use the word depressed, right? You're just bummed out. You lost. Okay, great. Let's refocus. Why'd you lose? What happened? Because that gets us into that fifth stage, which is acceptance. And the athlete goes, yeah, okay, I lost, right? Okay, what did I do? What do I need to do to better so that I'm not in that stage again. I'm not in this situation because I want to win, right? And that's what's really, that's the most important part of it. To me, that's the goal out of all this, is that when your athlete goes through this, the bad results, that's when the learning starts. And because it's not just about the result, it's about their ability now to process this as they go forward. All right. So I want you to help your athlete. I want your athlete to understand kind of what they're going through, what they're going to go through, and teach them and say, hey, listen, this is what you're going to feel. This is why you're going to feel it. For a lot of my parents, when I lay this out, they go like, oh yeah, you know what? When I didn't get my raise last year, I went through all those stages too. Well, there you go. All right. That's what I always say. Like, we learn everything we need to learn through sport. So that's the good stuff. So, all right. So listen, everybody, if I want to hear from you, like, so if this helped you, do me a huge favor, leave me a comment. That'd be great. Leave me a like on the video. If you're watching me on the video, it looks like we're having some connectivity issues. I don't know why, but leave me a like or send me an email, or reach out to me on Facebook. But do me a favor, share this with your athlete, right? Or an athlete that or share it with a coach or parent, things like that. Because like, as a lot of you guys know, like, I work with athletes. I have a 12-week coaching program that I put athletes through. Work with athletes now from a couple different continents, which is sweet. A lot of different sports. And we go through private coaching on this stuff. And I tend to embrace the thing that other coaches fear to talk about, right? And what ends up happening is I make our athletes mentally bulletproof so that they can survive whatever comes their way, because that's really what this is all about, right? We want our athletes to be able to withstand challenges and take advantage of opportunities. And that's it, right? That's all they can do, right? But the way they get there is when they're mentally bulletproof to take it all on. And I'm here to help for when you're ready. So if that's you, if you want to book a call, athletespecific.com/call, or you can email me directly, coachedwards@athletespecific.com. So thanks to everybody who joined: Helen, Heather, Martin, all the way from Norway, Martin, Davey, Sue Sweeney. Thank you for joining, and good luck to your daughter this year. Big fan, all right? She's been through a lot. Deborah Lynn, Carmine, Dave, Malcolm Klager, good to see you, buddy. Paul Nichols and Jeff Shire. Jeff Shire, who was around me when a lot of this went down. Helen Lang Evans, Jorge Ravenna, hello, sir. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Cheers, bye. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. It's Jonathan, and do me a favor, share this with an athlete, a parent, or coach who needs to hear it. And then head on over to athletespecific.com and download any of our freebies. We've got free automatic negative thought download, free webinars, free courses for athletes and parents, and I hope to see you there soon. Cheers.